everyone, and welcome to SUNUP. I'm Lyndall Stout. We begin today with a conversation about wheat disease and what you can do right now to prevent it in next year's crop. OSU Extension wheat pathologist Dr. Bob Hunger has some examples.
Well, Lyndall, here I have two samples of wheat. In my left hand is a sample of healthy wheat kernels that were harvested this last season. In my right hand is a sample of wheat that was heavily infested with common bunt, also called stinking smut. And there's importance with those this year is that we had a much higher incidence than usual of not only this bunt, the common bunt, but also of loose smut was in the field quite a bit in the spring.
Do you have an idea of why it was higher this year?
No, we really don't. These are these bunts and smuts are diseases that kind of sneak up on people. They can be easily controlled with seed treatments, but people tend to forget or just don't use them every year because of the cost involved with applying a seed treatment. So they kind of build up a little bit, and then all of a sudden you'll have a year where it will explode like it did this year with common bunt.
Now, you brought these examples, but you also have some photos to kind of go into to more detail about another type you want us to learn about.
Right. The loose smut is the one that's not quite as damaging. That's where the heads are replaced with massive amounts of black spores, and you don't have any kernels formed at all. And the thing about loose smut is that fungus will infect the seed and be inside of the seed. So if you take that seed to the elevator, it's not detected, it doesn't cause any problems in milling and baking, and it just goes on through. The only problem with loose smut infections is if you try to use that seed as seed wheat, because then you'll have infected plants the next year. With common bunt or stinking smut, it's a little bit different because that fungus survives on the seed itself in the form of spores or in the soil, again in the form of spores, and then infects the wheat when it germinates in the fall and is just coming up through the ground. They're both important diseases, but the common bunt stinking smut is the one that has exploded the most this past year.
You mentioned kind of some hot spots around Oklahoma, really detrimental for folks whose ultimate goal is to get that wheat to the grain elevator.
Oh, without a doubt, because northwest Oklahoma, western Oklahoma, north central Oklahoma, there were some hot spots of common bunt or stinking smut around. And of course, when they take wheat like this to the elevator, it's going to either be docked or just totally outright rejected because it's not really of quality to be able to use in milling and baking.
What do people need to be thinking about now as they're making seed choices and preparing for fall planting?
Well, if you had a problem with either loose smut or common bunt, don't use that seed that you harvest, that grain that you harvest as seed wheat for the next year. If you're in a situation, when we've been in this situation in the past where there's a shortage of seed, then you may have to use some of that seed, but if you do, make sure it's treated with the highest rate on the label of a fungicide that'll address and manage and control the bunts and the smuts. There's a lot of different ones that are available. The 2020 Extension Agent's Handbook on pages 262, 263 has a list of seed treatments.
Okay, Bob, great information. Thank you very much. And for a link to those resources that Bob mentioned, go to SUNUP.okstate.edu.
Over the past few years, cotton has actually been moving into traditionally wheat country. And Brian, different crops require different nutrients in the soil, and you're conducting an experiment right now on cotton.
Yeah, we're looking at the impact of soil pH on cotton production, cotton yield, and cotton quality. Why we do that is, as we've moved into that traditional wheat area like you've talked about, is that wheat has been bred to have a good aluminum tolerance and that it can manage in low soil pH realms and yield quite well. So we've got quite a bit of ground out there that cotton moved into that just hadn't been limed like traditionally. And so the Oklahoma Cotton Support Group came and helped us do trials for the last 2 years to look at the impact of soil pH variety on this. And so out here at EFAL, we've created a range of soil pHs that go from a 4 to an 8. And we're able to look at 2 different cultivars at each pH. And you see as we go down here on the end, that's our 4. So we have two plots down there at a pH of 4. We take stand counts and we have less than 1 plant per 10 feet a row, irregardless of the cultivar. As we moving into this realm, we have a 4.5, and that 4.5, we still don't have anything really growing. Right. We've got 1 or 2 more plants per row, not a big increase. But right here in front of me is where we're getting into the 5. And compared to what's back there, this is lush, this is luxurious. Right. We have a great stand and we're moving about 6 to 8 plants per 10 foot a row. But they're still suffering. We have skips, we have short plants, and it's just not moving. And you move from this 5 to right over here to a 5.5, right. And you really find that transitional mark. I mean, the plants from here to here are night and day differences. This isn't the cultivar difference, this is soil pH. Right. And so what we've seen, at least in our first couple years of the study, is that that critical threshold for this crop is somewhere between a 5.5 and a 6. Anything below that, we have significant stand loss, we have significantly less bolls, our nodes are not, we're not putting on the nodes that we need to, and so we have that reduction in yield. We've not seen in the first year data any reduction in quality, so at least that's a benefit, that we might be losing yield, but we're not losing quality. But this is a drastic example of why soil testing is so important. Getting a good soil sample across the field, whether it's a single composite, zones, or grid, and treating that pH, because not only is it impacting the crop growth, the crop stands, crop survivability, but it's also impacting the herbicides that we're using, that we're needing for residual herbicide to keep the weeds down.
Say you're a producer that's traditionally done wheat and they're wanting to try cotton one year. What should they do leading into that? And then secondly, what are there benefits from going from cotton back to wheat as far as pH the following year?
So as soon as the wheat's out, and wheat's a great crop to follow for wheat to cotton. One, the stubble, I like having stubble where I'm planting cotton because cotton does not leave a lot of residue. Right. So having that, and you come out of the wheat crop in June or July and you're able to take soil samples and immediately get in with lime, so that lime has time to react over the winter when you're starting to plant the cotton in the spring. So that's one thing important. If you have any idea of going into a cotton crop, take samples as soon as that wheat crop is out, so if you need lime, you can get it on, get incorporated. Now, as far as rotation, what we see is that following the rotation, once we get the lime in the ground, we may not benefit wheat grain yield drastically, but we really benefit forage production. And we see a massive benefit from forage production when we raise the soil pH from, say, a 5 to a 5.5. And so that does help survivability, that does help some stand establishment, and if you're a grazer, you definitely want more forage.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Brian Arnall, Extension Precision Nutrient Specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
Welcome to the Mesonet Weather Report. I'm Wes Lee. Much cooler than normal temperatures continued through the middle of this week. On Wednesday morning, the lows were quite comfortable, being in the low 60s for most of the state. In the Northeast, temperatures dropped even into the 50s. Miami was the coolest at 54 degrees. If you're wondering if this set new low records, the answer is no, but we came close in a few locations, as seen in this historical low record map for August 5th. This long-lasting cool front started in the latter part of July. It was potent enough to make the entire monthly average finish on the cool side for most of the state. Unfortunately, a good thing usually doesn't last forever. By the end of the week, we had returned to either normal or slightly higher than normal temperatures. On Saturday, the forecasted highs are expected to be in the triple-digit range in the western tier of counties. This returning heat should stay around for at least the near future. The National Weather Service forecast for the upcoming week looks to be slightly higher than normal. For Oklahoma, we see tan and red colors. That means warmer than normal is expected for our area. The good news is we are now past our long-term average hottest days of the year. Gary is up now with some positive rainfall news for the state.
Thanks, Wes, and good morning, everyone. Well, as Wes explained, we've had a lot of great temperatures lately. We've also had a lot of great rainfall, especially during July. It's made a big difference in that drought picture. Let's get right to the new Drought Monitor map and see what we have. As you can see, a greatly improved drought picture from the Drought Monitor. Really just a few splotches of drought, other than that spot in far west central into southwest Oklahoma, where we still see some moderate to severe drought, and then up in the far western panhandle, that persistent moderate to extreme drought that we see in that area. And we can see those great changes on the Drought Monitor change map from last week. So lots of those areas across western Oklahoma, even across the eastern parts of the state, saw dramatic improvements, really knocked the intensity of that drought down, as well as reduced the coverage. So the July rainfall, I know we've received some rainfall during August, but the bulk of the rains that improved the drought fell during July, and we can see those wonderful numbers on the new July Mesonet map for rainfall. North central Oklahoma, a good 7 to 10 inches, even as much as 12 inches of rain. So a foot of rain in north central Oklahoma. A lot of the northern half of the state saw between 5 and 10 inches. We can see the greatest amounts on the departure from normal map for July from the Mesonet. Again, up in the north central Oklahoma, from 5 to nearly 9 plus inches of rainfall across a good area. And in much of the northern half of the state, 2 to 3 to 4 inches above normal. Lots of those great amounts also out in the Panhandle and down in south central Oklahoma. We still see the deficits across western Oklahoma and down in southeast Oklahoma, but they're not huge. They're just around an inch or so. So that can certainly be overcome with some good rains. That's it for this time. We'll see you next time on the Mesonet Weather Report.
Crop prices have taken a beating lately. So Kim, what are the price levels at right now?
Well, wheat prices below $4 in most of Oklahoma, and around $3.90. If you go down at Snyder, that area, it's $4 and a nickel. You look at corn, it's below $3 at $2.95. But sorghum and milo, I mean, that's $3.61. And who'd expect for milo prices to be a good 65 cents above corn prices? Soybeans right down near $8 at $8.08. Cotton prices, they're holding steady around 64 cents.
So sticking with wheat prices were already kind of on the low end of the scale. So why are they continuing to fall?
Well, just massive world stocks. You look at world wheat production, 28.3 billion bushels. It's probably going to be a little higher than that. You look at world ending stocks, 11.6 billion bushels, 10.9 billion bushel record last year. The 5-year average is 10 billion. That's 1.6 billion bushels above the 5-year average. You look at Russian wheat production, they raised it to over 2.9 billion bushels this week. And of course, they increased the expected Russian wheat exports.
So besides Russia, is there any other news going on in the world wheat market?
Well, yeah, there's quite a bit of news coming in. France's wheat production is expected to be 25% less than last year. Of course, that's soft red winter wheat. German wheat production down 12% from last year. Romania's wheat production is lower than last year, and Romania exported wheat last year. That's good. Australia's expectations unchanged, but that's 955 million bushels compared to 558 last year. And then you've got Russian wheat quality, Russian wheat proteins down this year, and I don't think the markets realize that yet.
So it might not seem like it because all these months and days are all going together in this time, but it's been a while since we talked about canola prices. So how does canola compare with wheat?
Well, if you look canola prices, about $5.60 a bushel compared to $3.90 for wheat. If you look at canola planted acres this year, though, you only had 12,000 acres planted and you harvested 9,000 acres. So you harvested 3/4 of your planted canola acres. But canola price relative to wheat price is relatively high, and canola production around the world is low this year. That may indicate higher canola prices next year relative to wheat.
So going back to corn, why were corn prices lower than $3?
Well, with the rain that we've had around the United States, most analysts have raised the yield per acre for corn, and they've increased that production above that 15 billion bushel mark, and that's had a big hit on corn prices.
And finally, we're moving into the summer, late summer, so cotton's going to be on the mind of a lot of producers. What's the cotton price holding up like?
Well, it's holding up on the futures at 64. That's about 61 cents in Oklahoma. I think the market feels comfortable with their projected production, and so cotton prices just been moving sideways.
All righty, Kim. Dr. Kim Anderson, grain marketing specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
We've talked before on the CowCalf Corner about late summer supplementation of young growing cattle. One of the groups of cattle on most ranching operations is going to be bred replacement heifers. And I think now is the time of the year when we really want to do a good job of planning the growing program for these bred replacement heifers so that they're in the proper body condition next February when those heifers calve for the very first time. You see, we want those heifers to be in a body condition score of about a 6, or to be moderately fleshy. This is an example here on the screen of a heifer that's in that proper body condition. We want this much body condition or fat on her to help her get through that situation where she's calving. We want her to give the maximum first amount of milk that she's genetically capable of doing, that colostrum, to get her baby calf off to a good healthy start. Plus she has to have the energy to repair the reproductive tract in about a month and a half, and then begin to recycle to have a chance to rebreed for the following year's calf crop. And that all requires some energy. That's why we want some stored body energy on those 2-year-old replacement heifers at calving time. Between now, when she's just coming out of the breeding season, and next February, when she's going to calve, we need to have that heifer growing at a rate of 1 to 1.5 pounds per head per day. That means that those cattle need a diet that's about 10% crude protein. If a heifer weighs 850 to 900 pounds at this time of year, she's capable of consuming 2% of her body weight, or let's say about 18 pounds on a dry matter basis of the forage that's either in the terms of pasture or in stored grass hay that we might feed to her later this fall and into the winter. From that hay, if it's just average quality hay, she'll get about 1 pound of crude protein, and that heifer needs 2 pounds of crude protein per head per day to keep that growing program that we desire. So to make up the difference then, it requires a little supplementation. If we've got 1 pound of protein that we need to get supplemented to that heifer every day, if it's going to be fed via a 40% crude protein supplement, then it takes about 2 1/3 pounds of that supplement per head per day to meet her protein needs. If we're using a lower protein, higher energy supplement, then obviously it's going to take more. If we're using 20% range cubes, it's going to take about twice as much. So I think it's important that we keep in mind that we want this growing program for these bred replacement heifers to meet their needs, to continue to grow and to be in adequate body condition next February at the start of the calving season, so that she calves in that body condition score 6 and does the job that we want her to do for not only this calf crop, but next year's calf crop as well. Hey, we look forward to visiting with you again next week on SUNUP's CowCalf Corner.
Derrell Peel, our livestock marketing specialist, joins us now. Derrell, hard to believe we're well into the third quarter of 2020. Are cattle markets approaching anything that looks close to normal?
Well, I don't think normal is a word we get to use very much in our world these days, but compared to the first half of the year, we are beginning to see something, at least more stability in these cattle markets. You know, we've been through a lot of turbulence. That's mostly settled down now. We're seeing kind of a sort of a normal balance come back into play with wholesale beef markets. At least we're kind of operating with a little more stability now, certainly with an eye to what comes next, but compared to what we've been in, it's a lot better now.
It has been an extraordinary year. What can producers kind of keep in mind as we look at the second half of the year?
You know, for fed cattle markets per se, the biggest issue we have right now is still trying to get caught up on this backlog of fed cattle that we created in April and May when the slaughter plants had reduced capacity. Once we get past that, then, you know, really most of the feeder cattle or the cattle market fundamentals are again kind of back in sort of balance. So the bigger issues that I think will continue to be with us for the foreseeable future are really sort of the macroeconomic things. We're in a recession. The second quarter was awful. We're going to be in a recession for the rest of the year. What we're really trying to do is figure out from a beef industry standpoint of what does that mean for beef demand. So we're watching that going forward. So all of those issues related to, you know, not only the virus and the continued impacts there, but, you know, the macroeconomic conditions, unemployment, stimulus, unemployment benefits, which is going to have a lot to do with what consumers have for money to spend. And so all of those things are going to be really critical going forward.
A lot of cow-calf producers, of course, looking at fall calving and the market prospects for fall calves. What's your take there?
Well, you know, given where we are right now, again, we've kind of seen a sort of a slow grind this summer with prices for feeder cattle moving up. Calf prices normally don't increase this time of the year. They tend to be lower in the second half of the year. But seasonal patterns haven't meant a whole lot this year. And so I'm not, you know, that's one factor to keep in mind. On the other hand, if you look at where the futures markets are, so feeder cattle futures are more optimistic than that. And if you look at the lightweight calves, with a normal basis kind of a consideration, you can actually make an argument for slightly higher prices as we go into the fall. So there's some unknowns, but I think there's some reasons to be a little bit optimistic as we look towards these fall markets.
Now, wheat stocker producers, of course, will start thinking about putting cattle on wheat in a couple of months. What are the prospects looking like for grazing cattle on wheat?
Well, obviously the first challenge we always have is getting wheat pasture established. And so, you know, we've had some good rains recently. If we don't use up all that moisture with some late summer heat, we may have some decent prospects there. But beyond that, in terms of the economic conditions, you know, I just said we might see slightly higher calf prices in the fall. That would mean these stockers might cost a little bit more. But again, if you take the futures markets and go ahead and look out to next spring, those March feeder futures, actually, you can kind of put together a tentative budget that looks fairly attractive at this point. So, you know, we're going to have to keep an eye on it, but I think there's some opportunities there. Cow-calf producers may actually want to consider retained ownership of these calves, at least in a stocker or backgrounding sense this fall. Again, depending on what those spring markets look like compared to the markets this fall.
Okay, Derrell Peel, we appreciate your perspective as always. We'll see you again soon. Thank you.
We're standing in a woodland in the cross timber forest, and Dwayne, it hasn't always actually looked like this here.
Yeah, so historically, a lot of our forests in Oklahoma were open with lots of sunlight coming through the canopy and a lot of herbaceous, you know, grasses and flowering plants. But because of fire suppression primarily, a lot of those forests closed in. And so now if you drive through, you know, most of the central part of the state, you'll see lots of shade and not a lot of plants in the understory.
So you have actually had some research here for the past couple of years of thinning this out, doing some fire suppression, but why is it important to actually do this?
So there's a lot of plants and wildlife species that need sunlight in these forests. So thinning the overstory and getting more sunlight on the forest floor can really change what plants and animals are going to be on that site, but it also has a lot of use for landowners that might want to have a different type of forest on their property.
So what type of uses would that be?
Well, we could actually graze this now if you're a livestock producer, whereas before, you know, when it was mostly shaded, you know, there's no way anybody would have had cows on this site. You know, there's probably 100 pounds of cattle forage per acre at best, whereas now, you know, we're at least an order of magnitude higher. So these are grazable acres. Also, you know, from a hunting standpoint, the deer and the turkey habitat has increased tremendously. So there's a lot more potential for game species that people might be interested in. And there's also the aesthetics. You know, research has shown that most people prefer kind of an open forest where they can see, you know, for great distances. So it even has some aesthetic value just around your property.
So, and what's so interesting is over the years, we've shot with you in this area quite a few times, and you've actually shown our viewers how to thin out a really thick forested area. But this is now what it looks like, and it's pretty amazing to see just the growth and the openness and how much sunlight's coming through.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with having forests that are closed canopy and shaded, but we have a lot of forests like that in Oklahoma. We don't have a lot of forests that look like this. And if you're interested in, you know, turkey, deer, cattle grazing, or butterflies, I mean, there's all kinds of pollinating insects flying around in this area because now we have flowering plants. So this has a lot of value, and it's maybe something, you know, a landowner should consider if they would like to implement on their property.
And also, I think it's also important with eastern red cedar, because in this area, as we talked about in the past, eastern red cedar was a huge problem with this.
Yeah, if you thin the overstory and then don't burn, it's just going to come back in eastern red cedar. So before you do that initial thinning, you have to make sure that you're able and willing to use periodic prescribed fire. But if you can, you know, you can have tremendous benefits from wildlife and also a livestock production standpoint.
All righty, Dwayne. Dwayne Elmore, Extension Wildlife Specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
That'll do it for us this week. Remember, you can find us anytime online at SUNUP.okstate.edu and also follow us on YouTube and social media. I'm Lyndall Stout. Have a great week, everyone, and remember, Oklahoma agriculture starts at sunup.